Today we're getting into something that might seem small, but is actually super important on construction sites. We're going to be talking about how English language learners can use the past continuous tense to talk about health and safety.
Yeah, this can be really valuable. It might not seem like a big deal, but trust me, clear communication can literally be a lifesaver out there.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're looking at some information from an AI chatbot. This one was designed to teach English to folks who are working in construction, so it's got some really practical tips.
And, you wouldn't think a little grammar point could have such a big impact. But using the past continuous tense correctly can really make a difference in how clearly you communicate about safety. Think about it like this.
Yeah.
When something goes wrong on a site, you need to be able to explain exactly what was happening at that exact
All right. So we're talking about incident reports, toolbox talks, safety meetings, all those times when being precise with your language can actually help prevent accidents.
It's like those slow motion replays you see on sports channels.
Yeah.
They break down the action step by step so you can see exactly what led to the big play. The past continuous tense does the same thing with language.
Okay, I like that analogy. But before we get too deep into all that, let's back up a bit for anyone who might not be totally familiar with this grammar point. Can you give us a quick refresher on what exactly the past continuous tense ends?
Sure. So basically, it's how we describe actions that were in progress at a specific time in the past. And the way you form it is with was or were plus that ing verb ending.
So instead of saying something like he inspected the scaffolding, which is just one finished action, you'd say he was inspecting the scaffolding to show that the inspection was happening at a particular moment.
Right. You got it.
Okay, so let's say a worker falls from that scaffolding. If you just say he fell, you're missing a lot of important info.
Exactly.
But if you say he was climbing the scaffolding when, now we're getting somewhere. We know the action that was happening at the time of the fall, and that can help us figure out what might have gone wrong.
Exactly. And maybe another worker was moving equipment nearby at the same time. Suddenly you've got a much more detailed picture of what was happening, right? And that can be really helpful when you're trying to understand how an accident happened.
It's like those before and after pictures, but for actions instead of objects, right?
Yeah.
You're not just describing the end result, you're showing the whole process that led up to it.
And that's why it's so useful for safety training, too.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, when you use the past continuous during the toolbox talk, for example, you're not just telling people what to do, you're helping them visualize those actions in progress.
So instead of just saying, always wear your harness, you might say, remember that time John was installing roofing panels and his harness caught him when he slipped? He was following procedure and it probably saved him from a serious injury.
Exactly. That's a great example. Now you've got a real-world story that people can connect with, and it sticks in their minds because it uses that vivid, action-focused language of the past continuous tense.
You know, this is making me think about all those safety meetings I've sat through. Uh-huh. Imagine if everyone used this tense when they were describing past incidents or near misses. We'd have a much clearer understanding of what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again.
I think you've hit on something really important there. It's not just about using the past continuous correctly. It's about creating a culture where people are encouraged to use precise language when they're talking about safety.
So how do we make that happen? How do we get people comfortable using this tense in real-life situations?
Well, the chatbot we're looking at today actually gives some great phrases that are useful in a safety context. For instance, you can use it to set the scene like, at 10 a.m., the crew was dismantling the crane.
Or to describe an incident like she was operating the forklift when she noticed the oil leak.
Exactly. And you can even use it to talk about procedures like they were reviewing the safety checklist, before beginning the excavation.
I see. It's not about memorizing a bunch of grammar rules. It's about having those go-to phrases that you can use naturally when you need them.
Right. And the more you use them, the easier it gets.
Okay, so we've got the basics down, but our chatbot also includes an example dialogue that I think will be helpful to kind of bring all this to life. You ready to take a look?
Yeah, let's hear it. Examples are always good.
Okay, so this one's a short conversation between a foreman and a worker after a ladder incident. The foreman asks, "What were you doing when the ladder slipped?" And the worker replies, "I was reaching for the toolbox on the top rung."
Okay, pretty straightforward.
Right, but here's where it gets interesting. The foreman then asks, "Were you using the stabilizer bar?" And the worker says, "No, I wasn't."
Aha. See how that lack of the ing form tells us something important? He wasn't using the safety equipment, and the way he phrases his answer highlights that. It's like a clue that points to a potential safety violation.
Wow, so the past continuous or lack of it can really reveal a lot about what was going on during an incident.
Exactly. It shows how much information can be conveyed or omitted by how we use or don't use the past continuous tense.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how useful this grammar point can be. It's not just about speaking correct English, it's about using language to make the job site safer for everyone.
Couldn't agree more.
But before we get to practicing using this tense, I think we need to talk about some key vocabulary words that are specific to construction safety. Our chatbot actually provides a really helpful list.
Let's dive into those and see how we can use them along with the past continuous to make our safety communication even clearer.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so let's jump into those construction vocabulary words. I mean, these are words you're going to hear and use every day on a job site, right? So being able to use them naturally with the past continuous tense is going to make a real difference in how clearly you can communicate about safety.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? When I think back to some of those safety incidents I've seen firsthand, a lot of times it comes down to just a misunderstanding. Like people not being clear about what was happening at the time. Like maybe someone thought someone else was doing a certain task or they weren't sure who was operating a piece of equipment. If those folks had been using the past continuous tense, maybe those incidents could have been avoided.
Yeah, I think you're right. The past continuous really helps provide that specific context, that snapshot in time that can make all the difference. So let's take a look at some of these words. The first one on the list is inspect. Now, that might seem pretty basic, but it's super important when we're talking about safety. Why? Because inspections are all about finding potential hazards before they turn into a problem, right?
Right.
So let's say you're writing an incident report. If you want to show that the team was following proper procedures, you could say something like, the team was inspecting the scaffolding before the shift started.
Okay, I see. So that sentence tells us the inspection was an ongoing process, not just a quick glance.
Exactly. And if an accident did happen, well, using the past continuous to describe the inspection process can help figure out whether someone messed up or not. It helps establish that timeline, it just shows what actions were happening at specific moments.
Makes sense. What's next on our list?
How about operate? I mean, obviously, operating machinery safely is like the biggest part of construction work. And being able to describe who was operating what at what time, that's super important in understanding how those accidents happen.
So if there's an incident with a crane, for example, you might say, he was operating the crane when the cable snapped, to show exactly who was in control at that moment.
Exactly. And then you can start asking those follow-up questions, Was he trained properly? Was he following the rules? Was there something wrong with the crane itself? That past continuous, it just lays the groundwork for those investigations.
Okay, this is making more and more sense. It's like building a case piece by piece. using language to kind of replay those events leading up to an incident.
Right. And all those details matter. The more specific you can be with your language, the clearer that picture's going to be.
Okay, I'm ready for another word. What else is on the list?
Let's talk about secure. Securing equipment and materials. This is another big one.
For sure.
If something isn't secured the right way, it can lead to all sorts of trouble.
Yeah.
Falls, collapses, you name it.
Right. So you might use the past continuous to describe that process of securing something like they were securing the load to the flatbed truck when the wind picked up.
Yeah, exactly. Or if there was an incident with loose materials, you can say the debris wasn't properly secured and it was blowing around the work site when he tripped and fell.
Again, that lack of the past continuous, it's like a red flag. It shows us there might have been a safety violation there.
Exactly. It just goes to show how important it is to use this tense the right way consistently when you're talking about safety. It can really be the difference between things being crystal clear or a total mess.
Okay, one more word.
All right, this one's really relevant to what we're talking about today. Communicate. I mean, we've been talking about clear communication this whole time. And using the past continuous. It can help make sure everyone's on the same page, especially when things are happening fast.
Okay, so instead of just saying they didn't communicate properly, you might say something like, they weren't communicating clearly about who was supposed to shut off the power.
Right. That's a much better way to put it. It helps us understand exactly what went wrong. And it shows that communication isn't just a one-time thing. It's got to be ongoing.
Yeah, this is all really starting to make sense. I feel like I'm noticing the past continuous everywhere now.
That's great. That means it's sinking in.
But I'm sure there are still some challenges for people when it comes to actually using this in real life.
Oh, for sure. It always takes time to get comfortable with a new grammar point.
Right.
But the good news is our AI friend here actually has some practice prompts. These can really help you get the hang of using the past continuous.
Perfect. Let's hear them.
All right, so one of these asks you to imagine you're reporting a near miss to your supervisor.
Okay.
And it wants you to use the past continuous to describe everything that was going on before the near miss, what you were doing when it happened, and then what steps you took afterwards.
That's a really useful scenario. It gets you thinking about how you'd use the past continuous in a real situation. What kind of example answer does the chatbot give?
Well, one of them is, we were moving a heavy load with the forklift when the pallet started to slip. I immediately stopped and called for assistance to resecure the load.
Gotcha. So it uses the past continuous to set the scene and describe what was happening leading up to that near miss. And then it switches to the simple past tense to describe the actions that were taken afterward.
You got it. It just shows how you can use those two tenses together to tell the whole story clearly and accurately. And it also highlights the importance of those quick actions that often prevent a near miss from turning into an accident.
I'm ready to try it out.
Me too. It's one thing to hear about it, but it's another to actually do it.
Okay, listeners, here's your challenge. Think about a time when you saw or were part of a near miss on a construction site. Take a minute to think about what was happening before the near miss, what you were doing at that exact moment, and what everyone did to stop an accident from happening. Then try describing the whole thing out loud, using the past continuous as much as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. The goal is to just get comfortable using the tense and see how it can help you communicate more clearly about safety.
Yeah, and as you're talking through it, pay attention to what stands out to you.
Right.
Does using the past continuous change the way you think about what happened?
That's a great point. Sometimes just talking about something out loud using the right words can help us see it in a whole new way.
Yeah. And it can help us figure out those little things that might have contributed to that near miss in the first place.
It's all about awareness, right? For ourselves and for everyone around us. The more we talk about safety and the clearer we are with our language, the safer those job sites are going to be.
Could have said it better myself. So we've covered a lot today. We've gone over why this tense is important, some useful vocabulary words. We've even looked at examples and had a chance to practice. But I feel like there's still more to learn. What else can we get from this chatbot?
So we've talked a lot about what to say when you're using the past continuous, but what about when it's not there? Can we learn something from that too?
Oh, that's a good question. The chatbot didn't really talk about that specifically, but I think it's a really important point. Sometimes what you don't say can be just as telling as what you do say.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me an example.
Okay, so picture this. You're reading an incident report and it just says, the worker got hurt, head injury. That tells you the result, right? But it doesn't really tell you anything about what led up to it.
Right, it's missing all that context that the past continuous gives you.
Exactly. But now imagine that the report said the worker wasn't wearing a hard hat when a piece of debris fell from the upper floors.
Oh, wow, now we know a lot more. The fact that it doesn't use the past continuous in that first part about the hard hat, that's a big clue. It tells us the worker wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing.
Exactly. It's like there's a hole in the story, and that hole tells you something important. It makes you ask questions like, why wasn't he wearing a hard hat? Did nobody tell him to? Was nobody watching him?
It's like all those times you hear people say, it was just an accident. Like, there's no reason for it.
Right.
But it's almost never that simple.
Nope. There's always a chain of events, a series of actions, or in this case, inactions, that lead to that moment.
And that's where the past continuous comes in. It helps us figure out that chain of events so we understand not just what happened, but why it happened. It shows us those moments where different choices could have been made, Like where safety rules could have been followed or where people could have communicated more clearly.
Absolutely.
This is really making me think differently. It's like we're learning to read between the lines, not just in those written reports, but even in everyday conversations about safety.
It's exactly. We got to be aware, both when we're talking and listening. Are we giving all the info? Are we using the past continuous the right way to describe those key actions? Or are we accidentally leaving stuff out that could really help us understand and prevent accidents from happening again?
It's like that Sherlock Holmes saying, it is what is missing that is most important.
That's a good one.
Sometimes those missing clues are the most important ones.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about safety, we really got to pay attention to those missing pieces, those times when you don't hear that past continuous tense.
Okay, well, I think we've learned a ton today. From the basics of the past continuous to some really interesting ways it can be used, and even how the absence of it can tell us something important. Any final words of wisdom before we sign off?
I just say remember that words matter, especially when we're talking about safety.
Right.
The way we communicate can literally make the difference between someone getting hurt or going home safe. So let's all try our best to use the past continuous the right way to make our workplaces safer for everybody. Couldn't agree more. So to all our listeners out there working hard on those construction sites, remember clear communication is key to staying safe. And by mastering the past continuous tense, you're not just improving your English skills, you're becoming a more valuable member of your team and a real champion for safety. That's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep talking about safety.